Most people didn't notice the man on the bench. They walked past him every afternoon, avoiding his eyes, pretending he wasn't there. Just another man in worn shoes. Too many layers for summer. Head bent as if he carried the weight of 1,000 mistakes. But Gabriel noticed him. That day, the sun pressed down hard on the cracked sidewalk like it was trying to erase the shadows. Gabriel's steps were small, careful, his sneakers making soft taps against the pavement as he crossed the park like he always did after school. In one hand, he held a plastic lunchbox wrapped in a faded Pokemon towel. In the other, he kept his sleeve tugged low, covering the bruise blooming along his forearm. He didn't speak. He never did. Not to strangers, not to teachers, and never to his father. But something about the man on the bench made him stop. Gabriel sat the lunchbox beside him close, but not too close. Then, in a quiet voice that almost melted into the breeze, he said, "I brought this because I figured no one makes you lunch either. Same as me." The man didn't move. For a moment, he said nothing at all. Just looked at the boy with eyes too tired for his age. Julian Reed had worn many faces in his life. CEO, advocate, outcast. Now they're hidden behind a beard and secondhand jacket. He was nothing but a ghost to the city that once praised him. He glanced down and saw the edge of a fading purple mark on Gabriel's arm. Just above it, nail polish pink, uneven, half scrubbed off like someone had tried to erase it in a hurry. Julian's heart didn't break. It tightened. It remembered. And that was worse, because he'd seen those signs before. On himself. Back when he was called too soft, too dramatic, too sensitive to ever be a real man. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. He just opened the lunchbox. A sandwich cut into uneven halves, one half missing a bite. Gabriel shuffled his feet. "I was hungry," he whispered, "but I wanted you to have the rest." Julian looked at the boy and saw not a child in need, but a mirror fragile, bright, and chipped at the edges. He hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. He hadn't planned to speak to anyone ever again. But that night in a dim motel room, barely held together by peeling wallpaper and silence, Julian opened his laptop. He removed the beard, wiped the grime from his skin, sat tall, like he once did in boardrooms. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed Gabriel Project Restart. He didn't know what the plan would look like yet, but he knew what he saw in the boy, and he knew that someone, somewhere, needed to stand up before it was too late. This wasn't just a stranger's lunch. It was a cry for help in disguise. And this time, Julian wouldn't look away. If this story moved you, follow Heart Story for more powerful, true-to-life stories that matter. Stories where kindness changes everything. Julian started going to the bench earlier. He wouldn't admit he was waiting, but he was. He sat with his back straight, pretending to sketch on a notepad that remained blank for hours. And then, each day, just before the sun began to bend toward the trees, Gabriel would arrive. Quiet, cautious, always carrying something too big for his small hands, a folded lunchbox, a scrap of paper, or just silence. That afternoon, he brought a drawing. It was creased from being hidden in a book, edges curled and smudged with pencil dust. Gabriel didn't say a word as he placed it beside Julian and sat down, staring at his own shoes. Julian picked it up carefully. On the page was a princess. She had long hair and a dress shaded in soft rainbow tones. But what stood out most was the figure beside her, a tall man in a dark jacket, one arm holding a colorful umbrella, the other gently clasping the princess's hand. He had a beard, and on his chest, a tiny triangle. Julian realized it was meant to be a rainbow pin. He looked at Gabriel. "Who's the princess?" he asked. Not to tease, not even out of curiosity, but to understand. Gabriel hesitated. Then, almost too quiet to catch, he said, "It's me. If I were allowed to dream." Julian didn't speak. He knew better than to fill silence meant for truth. Over the next few days, Gabriel didn't come. The bench stayed empty. Julian tried not to worry, but his fingers kept returning to the folded drawing he now kept in his coat. On the third day, he saw Gabriel again, but something had changed. His hands were tucked deep into his sleeves. He walked slower. His eyes didn't lift. When he sat, he kept one arm tightly against his side. Julian caught a glimpse of red, raw skin where the nail polish used to be. His fingers had been clipped unevenly, some with jagged edges. One knuckle looked swollen. Julian forced his voice to stay even. "You weren't at the park. Everything okay?" Gabriel shrugged. "My dad says, only sick boys paint their nails. That no real son would ever wear pink." He sniffled once, then wiped it quickly with his sleeve. "I said I liked dresses. He didn't talk to me for 2 days. Just looked at me like I broke something." Julian's breath caught. The memories came back fast, too fast. The words, the silence, the slamming of doors not to punish, but to erase. He reached slowly into his bag and pulled out a small tin of watercolors. "You still draw?" he asked, gently. Gabriel looked at the tin, then away. "Only in my head." That evening, Julian messaged Marta Duval. She was in another time zone, but her reply came instantly. "Send the name. We'll start digging." Julian had already noted the school crest on Gabriel's backpack. It took less than an hour to identify the full name. Gabriel Rocha. Julian found more than he expected. A closed complaint from a teacher, citing concerns about Gabriel's well-being. A hospital visit for a fractured wrist, marked as accidental, and then a sealed report, filed years ago, mentioning the father Rayundo Rocha, retired military, deemed unstable but not criminally liable. Julian stared at the screen. He didn't need proof anymore. He already saw it, on Gabriel's skin, in his shrinking posture, in the way he whispered his dreams like secrets. But now he had documentation, a trail, the start of something. Gabriel once said, "If I were allowed to dream, Julian was going to make sure he could. And this time, no one would clip his wings for trying." Julian knew better than to act too quickly. When it came to children like Gabriel, rashness could do more harm than good. He needed to earn trust, build a bridge, then leave the way open, in case the child chose to cross it. So he waited for the next park meeting. Though each minute stretched like wire around his chest, Gabriel returned on a windy afternoon. His hair had been cut short, too short, unevenly clipped, as if done in punishment, not care. The skin behind his ears was red and dry. He didn't smile when he sat down. Julian said nothing at first. He just passed the tin of watercolors across the bench. Gabriel didn't touch it. Instead, he took out his pencil case. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the zipper. Then, without a word, he held the box out to Julian. Inside, between a blunt crayon and an eraser shaped like a cat, was a small flip phone, the kind that looked cheap and forgettable, perfect for being hidden. Julian looked at him, surprised. Gabriel answered before he could ask, "You said if I ever needed help." His voice was barely there. "This phone only has one number. Yours." Julian nodded, fingers wrapping slowly around the device. It felt like holding something sacred. Gabriel hesitated. "If my dad finds it, he'll throw it away. Or worse." Julian asked, "What happens when he finds things?" Gabriel glanced around, then tugged up his sleeve for just a second. The bruises weren't new, but one near the wrist had turned that deep, ugly yellow like rotting fruit. "He locked me in the laundry room because I tried on one of my mom's dresses. She left it behind. I just wanted to see." Julian breathed carefully, keeping the storm inside from rising too fast. "What did you see in the mirror?" he asked, gently. Gabriel blinked. "Me, but happy." That night, Julian sent an encrypted message to Marta Duval. She replied with 2 words, "Operation G." Julian typed back, "Not yet, but almost." 2 days passed. No Gabriel. The bench remained cold and empty. Julian checked the phone every hour. Nothing. On the 3rd day, a man in a maintenance uniform approached the park bench. He looked like a cleaner, carried a broom and a trash bag. But Julian recognized him. One of Marta's people, silent, discreet, reliable. The man bent down near a bush and came back holding something, a folded paper, slightly damp from the morning dew. He slipped it to Julian as he passed. Julian unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was uneven, hurried, the paper torn from a school notebook. "I'm not allowed to leave my room." He locked the door again. "I don't know how long. Please, help me." Julian didn't move, didn't blink. Then he picked up the phone, dialed the only number stored in that cheap plastic device. Let it ring once, then twice. He knew Gabriel wouldn't answer, but someone else would. Marta's voice came through, clear and calm. "Is this the green light?" Julian whispered. "It's not a project anymore. It's a rescue." Across the city, gears began to turn. The child had spoken. The system would follow. And Julian, once branded a pariah, was now the spark that lit the fuse. Because when a child's only escape is a note behind a bush, someone has to burn the door down for him. The house was darker than the street around it. From the outside, it looked like any other place in the neighborhood, modest, with a chipped porch railing and a flag hanging faded on the wall. But inside, behind the second window on the left, a small boy was counting the seconds between footsteps. Gabriel hadn't spoken in 3 days. Not since the lock clicked. Not since the yelling stopped. The silence was heavier than the beatings. He could still feel the bruise across his ribs when he breathed too deep. But that wasn't what made him afraid. It was the way his father had looked at him, like he was something broken, something shameful. Like Gabriel's very existence was a problem to be erased. That night, as the wind stirred outside and the town quieted down, a car with no lights slowed near the curb. It didn't stop. Not yet. Inside were 3 people, 2 trained responders and Marta Duval. She held a file in her lap, her thumb resting on the drawing of a princess in a rainbow dress. Julian wasn't with them. He had insisted on watching from a distance. He knew this wasn't about him. This was about Gabriel finally walking into a life that didn't hurt. They waited until the lights inside dimmed. Then the team moved. In silence, they crept to the side window. Marta had memorized the floor plan. She knew the laundry room backed onto a crawl space. They had brought tools, a set of gloves, and the one item Julian had insisted on: Gabriel's watercolor tin. It was a promise, not a gift. They opened the latch. It stuck at first. Years of paint and rust resisted them, but it gave in, quietly. They removed the screen and pushed the window open just enough. Inside, Gabriel sat on a pile of dirty towels. He wasn't asleep. He didn't even flinch when the cold air brushed his face. One of the responders whispered his name, held up the rainbow pin, the one Julian had always worn. Gabriel blinked, stood, then nodded. No words. He climbed out slowly, holding something wrapped in a t-shirt. Once outside, the team helped him into the car and pulled away without headlights, as if the house itself might try to swallow them back. Only when they were 2 blocks away did Marta ask, gently, "What did you bring with you?" Gabriel opened the bundle. Inside was a broken pencil case, taped and cracked, a faded photo of his mother, creased in the corners, and a folded drawing, one he hadn't shown Julian yet. It showed a boy in a princess crown, holding hands with a tall man wearing a rainbow pin. They stood beneath a sign that read "Safe," back at the house, just before sunrise. The police arrived with a warrant. Rayundo Rocha met them at the door with fury. He shouted about discipline, about turning boys into men. He screamed that Gabriel was being poisoned. "They took my son," he yelled. "He's not a freak. He's not some thing to be dressed in skirts and paraded around." Officers stepped between him and the doorway. He kept shouting, even as the cuffs clicked, "He's my son. I had to fix him." He wasn't normal, but no one listened. Because by now, the evidence spoke louder than he did. And Gabriel was safe. That night, in a quiet guest room far away, the boy slept, still curled up, but no longer afraid. Outside the door, Julian stood quietly. He hadn't asked to be there. Marta had arranged it. Gabriel had whispered, "I want him to know I made it out." Julian didn't go in. He just stood, fingers pressed against the wood, and whispered back, "So did I." The courtroom was quiet, heavy with the kind of silence that follows something too raw to explain. Gabriel sat beside his temporary guardian, Melissa, hands folded, feet swinging slightly above the floor. He wore a gray sweater too big for him, the sleeves nearly covering his fingers. But on his left wrist, visible now, was something he hadn't shown in weeks. A bracelet of yarn red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. The colors of a flag he no longer had to hide. Melissa had been kind from the beginning. A retired school teacher, mother of a transgender son who'd passed away years ago. She had seen children like Gabriel before. Children who weren't broken, but were treated like they were. She gave him space. Let him draw on the kitchen table. Let him call himself anything he wanted. Gabriel still asked for Julian. But Julian had made a decision. He wasn't at the table to adopt. He wasn't there to claim. He stood instead as a witness, as a provider of truth. His suit was clean, his beard trimmed, and pinned to his lapel was the rainbow triangle. Sharp, unapologetic. When the judge asked if he had anything to submit, Julian opened a file. Inside were photos of bruises, reports from teachers, emergency room visits swept under the rug. But on top of everything else, he placed a set of drawings. One by one of us. The judge turned the pages. A boy in a dress, smiling beside a man with a kind face. A rainbow castle, small hands held high like a victory. A version of childhood that hadn't yet existed but desperately wanted to. Then Julian spoke. His voice was even, but every word landed like a stone. That child doesn't need to be fixed, or shamed, or bent into someone else's mold. That child needs space. And people who don't make love conditional. He paused, held the judge's gaze. I don't want custody. I want him to have what I never did. The right to dream without punishment, to be stuffed in and safe and real. The court ruled in favor of full protective separation. Rayundo Rocha was ordered to enter psychological rehabilitation and barred from contacting Gabriel. The room exhaled in quiet relief, but that wasn't the end. 6 months later, a small gallery in the city hosted an exhibit titled Second Chance. The space was simple white walls, soft lights, quiet piano in the background. In the center stood one large canvas, surrounded by smaller works. Guests walked slowly, whispering, pausing. Then came the main piece. A boy in a soft pink dress, wearing a glittering crown, stood center stage beneath a gentle spotlight. His smile wasn't forced. It wasn't seeking approval. It simply was. The backdrop behind him was dark blues, blacks, grays, but the crown shimmered against it. Below the canvas, a phrase written in careful handwriting. This time, no one made me hide. Julian stood quietly in the back, hands behind his back, Marta beside him, Melissa at the front, taking photos proudly. The boy who once slipped drawings under park benches was now standing before a crowd that clapped for him. And then, as the lights dimmed, Gabriel turned from the stage and walked directly to Julian. He leaned up, tugged at the sleeve of Julian's jacket, and whispered, "Can I call you Dad if you want?" Julian's breath caught. He nodded, no words coming, just one hand reaching down to hold a smaller one, this time not as a stranger, not as a savior, but as someone who stood still until a child taught him to move again. Have you ever witnessed a quiet act of courage that changed everything? Share it below. Your story might be the hope someone else needs today. And if this journey touched your heart, follow Heart Story for more stories that matter, where softness is strength, and being true is never too much.